In this photography tutorial, we're going to be doing some smoke photography. I'll walk you through step by step on how to create these abstract, ethereal images of smoke on a black background. It's a really relaxing shoot that you guys can do at home on your coffee table, so stick around and I'll get started in just a sec. Hi guys, I'm Ben from Adaptalux and welcome to another photography tutorial. Today we're taking a look at smoke. We're going to be getting nice ethereal, abstract looking shots of smoke rising from incense. This is a really great subject for sitting at home in the evening and relaxing, watching the smoke doing its thing, and if you've got some nice smelling incense as well, it's going to make your house smell quite nice. That's an added benefit. I'm going to start setting up and let's take a look at what we're going to need to get shots like these. So the very first thing that we're going to need is something that burns. For that I've got some incense. There's a couple of different types here. We've got the incense sticks, which are a little bit more common and they fit into an incense stick holder like this so you don't burn anything. Obviously this one's quite well used. My wife really likes this stuff. It makes the house smell really nice. But we've also got these little incense cones as well, which burn in a slightly different way, which we'll talk about in just a little while. The most important stuff is that it burns for a long time and it burns at a consistent rate so that you've got enough time to find the sweet spot of your smoke and set up your composition and lighting. Speaking of lighting, we've got the Adaptalux Studio Flash Lighting Arms at the ready, and I've got a control pod sat on a mini tripod. On a full-size tripod, I've got my camera, which is a Sony a7 III, and I've got a 100mm Tachyna lens on the front of that. Over here, I've got a black backdrop. This isn't strictly necessary, but it's going to help to give you that black background, which then gives you a lot of contrast between your white smoke and the backdrop. The last little piece of equipment that I would recommend for this shoot, again, isn't strictly necessary, but it's a lot more relaxing if you use a shutter release cable. You can just plug these into your camera and then you can sit back on your sofa and shoot on your coffee table without having to be looking through your viewfinder all the time and having your hands touching your camera and potentially giving you more camera shake. You can just sit back and press the button every now and again when the smoke looks most interesting. Take care of the important stuff first and get yourself something to sit on. Make yourself comfortable. We're going to be sat here for potentially up to half an hour each time as our incense burns down. So if you have the luxury of setting up on your coffee table without disturbing the rest of the family on the sofa, go ahead and do that. If you want the full hippie love-in experience, set some mood lighting, get a beanbag, maybe something made of wicker. I'm going to be sat here on my swivelly desk chair because I'm going to be getting up in just a moment to go and light my incense and take care of my lighting. Those are sat about 1.5 meters away on the other side of my coffee table. I want to be quite far back so that we can get a good idea of where our smoke is going to be the most interesting. This is going to give us quite a wide frame and we can crop it later on and we can move in and adjust as our incense burns. I've got my flash trigger sat on the top of my camera on my hot shoe because my lighting is going to be over 1.5 meters away with my incense. I've got my remote trigger here so that I can sit back, relax and watch my incense with my own eyes and just press my shutter release every time I see an interesting flicker or wisp. I'm going to go and set up my flash lighting arms and light my incense. So I've got my Adaptalux control pod sat on a mini tripod, which is going to give it a little bit of height over my coffee table here. I've got my flash lighting arm at the ready and I'm just going to plug that in and position it roughly next to where I think my smoke is going to be. My little incense cone is down here, so I think my smoke is going to rise and potentially have a little bit of turbulence around this height, which is exactly where my light is pointing. These do actually have quite a wide blast radius, shall we say, so you don't have to worry too much about getting it pointing in exactly the right direction. And because we've got a nice long burn time on our incense, we can actually adjust all of this afterwards. I've got my black backdrop set up just to the left here, so that it's just covering the entire frame of where my smoke potentially might be. I'm going to light my incense now and see what my smoke actually looks like as it rises. So I'm sat back over here with my camera and you can see my smoke going in the background. But before we start taking some pictures, we need to set some settings to get everything looking right in our camera. The very first thing that we need to do is focus. So before you worry about exactly what settings you need to brighten up your image as much as possible, be that using your shutter speed or your ISO, or maybe just click your aperture down a few notches, so that you can see your smoke pillar as it rises up. If you've not got a lot of turbulence in your air, that pillar will go directly upwards as mine is doing now, and you can find that in your camera, potentially zoom in and get some really sharp focus on that dead center of your smoke. If you can't do that, if your room is a little bit more breezy than mine, perhaps sit something next to your incense, and then you can focus on that instead. Take it away again and you'll have that point of focus set on your camera. You do need to be shooting in manual mode, otherwise every time you half press the shutter it's going to try and refocus and your camera won't be able to find that smoke. The next thing that you need to do is put all of your settings back down. So I'm going from ISO 160,000 to try and find my focus there, down to I think about 1000. I'm shooting at 1/160th and an aperture of f11. f11 is so that we get quite a deep depth of field. 1/160th is so that we're in sync with our camera. There's no point in going any faster than that, nor any slower. So those are pretty ideal settings. If you find that you can see your black backdrop in your frame right now, you might need to reduce some ambient light or potentially lower your ISO. You want it to be as low as possible while still being able to pick up the flash when it goes off. When you're talking about composition, you can shoot either portrait or landscape. Right now I'm shooting in landscape mode, but I think I'm going to flip over to portrait mode so that I can get the most out of my resolution on the height of this smoke. It's really important in these shots to get a lot of contrast between the smoke and your background. That's why we're using a black background here, and a lot of the techniques that we used in our black background tutorial actually apply here as well. We want to get a pure black background. Because the flash is pointed sideways, it's not bouncing off my backdrop at all, and it's not illuminating anything other than the smoke. The ambient light in my room, although it's quite bright in here, is counteracted by the settings in my camera. You can test all of this and make sure that you're getting a pure black background by just temporarily taking some pictures without using the flash. So I've just turned off the flash emitter, and if I take a picture, I should be getting a pure black image on here. We shouldn't be seeing any smoke, and you shouldn't be seeing any of your background. If you are, it means your settings are too high. You're getting too much ambient light captured by the camera. We don't want any of that. The only light that we want to capture is created by the flash. So when I turn my emitter back on again, we should be able to capture only the light created by the flash bouncing off the smoke. And that'll give us a really nice bright smoke and a really dark background. A quick mention about the different types of incense then. So we've got these incense sticks, which most people will be familiar with. They sit in a little incense stick holder like this, and they usually sit at an angle. And that is why they're not quite as ideal as the little cones. If you can get hold of some of those cones, they're much better. With the stick, if you set it up at an angle, say across your frame like this, then the source of your smoke is going to move as the stick burns down. It'll move across your frame and you'll have to recompose all the time. If you think, well, I don't want it to move across my frame, you can set it up pointing at you, but then of course, as it burns down the stick, it's going to move in and out of focus, so you'll have to refocus. You can burn it straight upwards like this, but it's not ideal for those smoke effects, and you'll probably have some of the stick in your frame. I do recommend trying to get hold of some cones. Not only do they give off more smoke, but they stay in the same place. I've burned through a few of these little incense cones now. It's very smoky in my living room and quite fragrant, so I think it's time to go and do some post-processing. There's a lot that you can do to finish and use these images on the computer, so I'm going to upload them and see what we've got. I've been through the hundreds of shots that I've taken today and picked out just a few of the more interesting ones with interesting shapes that the smoke has created and just sort of some of the more pleasing shots. I'm just going to be taking a look at these in camera raw. I've got some of these basic adjustments done on the right hand side here, and I'm going to walk you through some of the more interesting settings. If you're over in Lightroom, a lot of these sliders are going to be the same for you, so you can just follow these along and slide the same sliders that I'm sliding, but in other programs. So I've got this shot here. I've not done anything to this yet because I want to just give you a quick overview of what some of these different sliders can actually do. The first thing that I'm going to do is take a look at my color. So this is straight out of the camera. You can see that my color temperature was a little bit on the cool side, which means that this smoke is looking a little bit blue, and that's the same for all of my shots, and I actually really like it. So what I'm going to do is just up my vibrance just a little bit to enhance some of that blue. You can play around with your saturation as well, but I do like to leave it a little bit more on the subtle side with just a little bit of a cool look for these images. That's going to come into play a little bit later when we start playing around with changing our colours. The next thing that I want to do, and something that I've done on most of these shots, is just up the contrast a little bit more. So this helps to remove any residual light from our black background and also brighten up some of the more interesting areas of our smoke. So you can see that those white areas are getting just a little bit whiter. If you're overexposing some of these areas, you can by all means play with the rest of these settings, bring some of your whites down to recover some of those highlights if you want to. Now we get on to these more interesting settings down here. Your texture, clarity and dehaze sliders do a lot of good for these shots, and they do a lot of good in both directions depending on the type of shot that you want to go for. So smoke generally looks quite ethereal and wispy. If you want to enhance that type of look and get some very soft looking shots, you can slide these sliders to the left. So bringing your texture down and your clarity down and even your dehaze, it makes that smoke look more smoky. You're going to lose any sharpness that you had on the parts of your image that intersected with your plane of focus, but I do think that there is something here, there's something to be said for making these shots look a little bit more dreamlike. Now, if you want to go the other direction, which I think is going to suit this type of shot a little bit more, you can take these to the right. So upping the texture, upping the clarity, and even upping that dehaze can make these shots look a little bit more skeletal, really highlighting the very edges of where the smoke is finding itself. So the more you go to the right with these, the more extreme you can get with this very abstract look. You can get almost to the point where only the very edges of your smoke are showing. For a very complicated shot like this, where there's a lot of lines and where this smoke is coming towards the camera here and it's a little bit out of focus, you can get a lot of detail brought out of your image. I'm going to leave it in sort of a middle ground here, bring the dehaze down, bring the clarity down a little bit, and bring the texture down to probably about there. For a shot that does make a lot of use of these left-hand sliders, I think something like this, where you've got these overlapping smoke sort of rings even, I think this adds to that ethereal sort of smoky look. The last thing that you probably want to do on shots like these is play with the detail settings here. So you can add up quite a lot of noise on these dark backgrounds. I like to just play with my noise reduction here at this point, simply so that I can get rid of some of this dark noise. You can just bring this slider up until you can't see any of that camera noise on the background there, or at least to a point where you're happy with. The further up you push that slider, the less sharp your image is going to be, but for shots like these with the smoke, I don't think it's too bad if it's not pinpoint sharp. I'm going to open a couple of these up in Photoshop and show you something that we can do with our colours. I've exported a few of these as JPEGs and brought them over into Photoshop and just done a little bit of cropping and rotating to find some of the more interesting areas on my images, just where the smoke has done some cool curls and spread out in pleasing ways, and where the sharpness has really come through, where the smoke has intersected where my plane of focus was set. So I just want to play around with these a little bit more to see if we can't make them a little bit more useful for things like stock images or using on a website, integrating with branding, things like that. What we can do here is play with this blue hue that we've ended up with. Because my colour temperature was a little bit cool, we've got this blue colour on here. We can actually use this to change to any colour that we like, simply by playing around with our hue. I'm going to do this using an adjustment layer. If you don't have the adjustments panel open, you can find it in the window menu and just hit adjustments, and this will pop up somewhere. We can then add a hue saturation adjustment layer, which you can see in our layers panel, and then by selecting that and playing around with our hue slider, we can change our smoke to pretty much any color that we'd like. I actually really like it as this sort of turquoisey color. Now, if you don't want any color at all, you can of course just drop your saturation or change it to black and white using any other method you like, but I do quite like it with a little bit of color. Now, there is one other thing that we can do to make these a little bit more useful for things like websites. You'll notice that most websites have white backgrounds, and this has a very dark black background. Using a simple method, we can change that to have a white background. Select your main image here, go to Image, Adjustments, and Invert. You can see that that's instantly inverted our image. The blacks have become whites, and because that's a pure black background, this white will be very close to pure white as well. It has changed the color of our smoke and inverted that as well, but you can't really tell the difference when it comes to the smoke because it was pretty wispy anyway. You can then go back to your hue saturation adjustment layer and play around with your hue again. So I'm going to see if I can find that same turquoisey look. And then we have turquoise on a white background. I think this looks really cool, and it's an effect that I'm going to play around with a lot more. As you can see, I've very quickly whipped up an example of how this could be used on a website for a banner. What I've done is brought in a second layer under here. I just brought in this image across into this one. You can see it here as layer 1, and I've dropped that underneath the hue saturation layer, inverted it, and it's adopted those same colors that we have set in our hue saturation. Add a little bit of text, change your cropping to fit your website, and you've instantly got a rather eye-catching, interesting image that could easily fit into your website. There's unlimited ways to use these, so I'm not going to go dictating how you can put these into effect and display them, but I'm sure you guys will come up with some very interesting ideas. I've particularly enjoyed this shoot simply because it is so relaxing and easy to set up in a single evening on your coffee table and just relax taking some really cool shots. Let me know down in the comments if you'd like to see more of this relaxed type of shooting, things that are easy to do at home and great ideas for just chilling out. Let me know if you enjoyed this video by dropping a like, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more photography tutorials, ideas and inspiration in the future. For now though guys, that's all that I've got time for. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.